March 11th, 1945. A muddy field somewhere west of the Rhine. The rain doesn't fall. It seeps from a sky the color of wet concrete. It turns the churned earth into a cold, grasping slurry that sucks at the boots of Corporal Daniel Avery, US Army Medical Corps. The air is thick with the smell of damp wool, diesel fumes, and the metallic tang of fear. This is Prisoner of War Temporary Enclosure A5, a hastily erected city of mud and canvas where the remnants of the Wehrmacht are being processed. The war, they say, is almost over. But here in the shadow of the concertina wire, the war is an endless, gray river of shuffling men. Dan watches them from the flap of the medical tent, a column of them, hunched against the wind, their Feldgrau uniforms stained dark with rain and dirt. There are boys who look barely old enough to shave, and old men with the faces of grandfathers, all wearing the same expression of hollowed-out exhaustion. You see it enough, that look, and you stop seeing enemies. You just see the end of a long, bad road. His job is triage, quick, efficient, impersonal. Check for shrapnel, check for fever, check for frostbite. Patch what you can, tag the serious cases for the field hospital, and move on to the next. It's a factory line for broken people. A military policeman, a private first class named Miller with a perpetually dripping helmet, sloshes over to him. "Got another one for you, Corporal. A Fraulein this time." Dan grunts, wiping condensation from his spectacles with a thumb. Women were becoming more common in the roundups. Flat Helferinnen, Nachrichten Helferinnen, female auxiliaries who manned the phones and the guns. To him, they were just another category on a form. "What's the issue? Wounded?" "Nah, not that I can see," Miller says, spitting a stream of brown tobacco juice that vanishes into a puddle. "She's just quiet. Won't hardly move. One of the guards said she's been standing for hours, complaining about sitting down. Figured we should get her checked before she keels over." Dan sighs. A complainer. Just what he needs. He grabs his aid bag, the canvas worn smooth and dark with use. "All right, bring her in." The tent is a small island of relative dryness. A single bare bulb, powered by a sputtering generator outside, casts a weak yellow light over two canvas cots, a crate of medical supplies, and a floor of muddy duckboards. The sound of the rain is a constant drumming on the roof. Miller pushes the tent flap aside and nudges the woman forward. She is perhaps 25, though the war has carved another 10 years onto her face. Her hair, a pale blonde, is matted and plastered to her scalp. She wears a standard female auxiliary uniform, the gray wool soaked through, a Luftwaffe eagle patch still visible on her sleeve. But it's her eyes that hold him. They are a washed-out blue, devoid of defiance or fear or anything, really. They are simply vacant, fixed on a point somewhere beyond the back wall of the tent. She stands stiffly, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding her own bones together. "All right, have a seat," Dan says, gesturing to one of the cots. His voice is flat, a tone perfected by a year of dealing with pain and panic. The woman doesn't move. She just looks at the cot as if it were an instrument of torture. Miller gives her a gentle push. "Go on, he ain't in white." She flinches at his touch, but takes a hesitant step forward. She lowers herself with agonizing slowness, her body rigid, her hands gripping the edge of the cot for support. The moment her weight fully settles, a sound escapes her lips, not a cry of pain, but a sharp, involuntary hiss, like a breath drawn through clenched teeth. Her eyes shut tight, and her knuckles turn white where she grips the canvas. Dan watches, his professional curiosity piqued. This isn't malingering. This is real. "What's your name?" he asks, his German functional but clumsy. "Liesel," she whispers, her voice raspy. "Liesel," I repeat. "What's the problem? What was this problem?" She opens her eyes. The vacancy is gone, replaced by a flicker of something he can't quite name. Shame, maybe, or a deep, weary dread. She looks at him, then at the cot, then back at him. Her English is heavily accented, the words chosen carefully, as if they were fragile things. "Every time I sit," she says, her voice barely audible over the drumming rain, "it hurts." The words hang in the damp air of the tent, simple and utterly bizarre. It hurts. Corporal Avery has heard every possible description of pain. Men have screamed about phantom limbs, whispered about the fire of a gut wound, cried out from the clean, sharp agony of a broken bone. But this was different. The woman, Liesel, remains perched on the edge of the cot, her posture unnaturally straight, her entire body a steady in tension. She looks like a bird ready to take flight at the slightest threat. Dan pulls a small wooden crate over and sits opposite her, leaning forward with his forearms on his knees. He needs to move past the strangeness of the complaint and into the familiar territory of diagnosis. "Where does it hurt?" he asks, keeping his voice calm and even. "Show me." She shakes her head, a small, tight motion. Her gaze drops to the muddy floorboards between her feet. It is below, at the back. The words are disjointed, reluctant. A tailbone injury, he thinks. A fall, maybe. A jeep hitting a ditch too hard during a retreat. Plausible, common even. Did you fall? Were you in a vehicle that crashed? Another shake of the head. No eye contact. 9. This is like pulling teeth. He glances at Miller, who is still lingering by the tent flap, his curiosity overriding his duty to get back to the line. He gives him a slight nod. "I got this, Miller. Go on." The PFC grunts and disappears back into the gray deluge, leaving the two of them alone in the flickering yellow light. The generator outside sputters, and the bulb dims for a moment before regaining its strength. "I need to examine you," Dan says, switching back to his clumsy German for clarity. "Ich muss Sie untersuchen. It's the only way I can help." He stands and gestures to the cot. "You'll need to lie on your stomach." For a moment, she doesn't respond. He sees a tremor run through her shoulders. You learn to read the silent language of trauma. You see it in the way a soldier flinches at a backfiring truck, or the way a civilian stares into the middle distance. This woman is locked in a fortress of silence, and he needs to find a way in. "Bitte," he adds, his tone softer than he intended. "Please." Slowly, as if every muscle protests, she rises. She turns and lowers herself onto the cot, face down, with the same excruciating care she used to sit. She places her forehead on her folded arms, her body as stiff as a board. Dan gives her a moment, letting the rhythm of the rain fill the space. He moves with a deliberate lack of haste, pulling a sterile gauze pad from a tin and wetting it with antiseptic from a glass bottle. The sharp, clean smell cuts through the mustiness of the tent. "I'm going to have to move your skirt," he says, his voice strictly professional. "I need to see the injury." She gives a barely perceptible nod against her arms. He gently lifts the hem of the heavy wool skirt and the thin undergarment beneath it, exposing the base of her spine and the upper part of her buttocks. He's expecting to see the telltale purple and blue of a deep bruise, the angry red of a fracture site. But that's not what he sees. His breath catches in his throat. This is no injury from a fall. There are scars, old silvered scars, dozens of them, laid out in a horrifyingly symmetrical pattern. They are not the jagged, chaotic marks of shrapnel. They are not the long, clean lines of a surgical knife. These are something else entirely. Small, round, perfectly spaced, as if laid down with a ruler and a compass. They form a dense, repeating grid across the pale skin, like the indentations left by a steel grate, but permanent, etched into her flesh. Some are faded white, ghosts of old pain. Others are a more recent, angry pink, puckered and raised. They are a map of a place he cannot imagine. He feels a cold knot tighten in his stomach. His mind races, trying to find a medical explanation. A rare skin disease? An allergic reaction to something? Nothing fits. Combat wounds are messy, chaotic, products of explosive physics. This was orderly. This was deliberate. He touches the edge of one of the older scars with the tip of his finger. The skin is cold, tough as leather. Despite her rigid control, her entire body flinches, a violent, full-body shudder. "Was ist das?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. "What is this?" She doesn't lift her head. Her voice is muffled by her arms, a deadened sound that is somehow heavier than a scream. "The East," she says. Just 2 words. And suddenly,
The rain against the canvas sounds like 1,000 whispering voices, telling a story he is not sure he wants to hear.
The East. The words echo in the small, damp space, changing everything. For an American soldier on the Western Front, the Eastern Front is a myth, a legend of unimaginable savagery whispered about in letters from home and fragmented intelligence reports. It's a war of a different color, fought under a different set of rules, or no rules at all. It is Stalingrad and the siege of Leningrad, a conflict of absolutes where surrender is often a death sentence. And now, the ghost of that war is lying on his cot. Corporal Dan Avery looks again at the scars. The pattern. It's not random. It's a grid. A perfect, repeating geometry of cruelty. His mind, trained to see symptoms and diagnose causes, starts to assemble the terrible equation. The shape, the spacing, the location. He thinks of the heavy steel mesh used for temporary airfield runways or reinforcing concrete bunkers. Something coarse, unyielding. He feels a wave of nausea. This wasn't a weapon of war. This was an instrument of interrogation, of torture. The image forms in his mind, unbidden and horrific. This woman, forced to sit for hours, for days, on a surface designed to inflict maximum pain without producing a single clean wound. The pressure points, the grid digging into flesh, slowly, methodically, grinding away skin and muscle until it left this permanent, brutal tattoo. The pain of sitting wasn't a symptom of a new injury. It was the memory of an old one, a memory her body refused to forget. Every chair, every bench, every cot was a ghost of that steel mesh. The Russians? He asks, his voice low. A shudder runs through her, a tremor that starts in her shoulders and goes all the way down her spine. It's the only answer he needs. He straightens up, stepping back from the cot as if it were radioactive. His professionalism is a thin sheet of ice, and it's cracking under the weight of this discovery. He's seen men torn apart by machine guns, burned alive in tanks, vaporized by artillery. He has packed ruins filled with mud and splintered bone, and he has done it with a steady hand. That was war. It was terrible, but it had a certain logic. An 88mm shell didn't hate you. It was just physics. But this was personal. This was the work of a human mind, spending time and effort to design suffering. Liesel slowly, carefully pulls her clothing back into place. She pushes herself up, avoiding his eyes, and sits on the edge of the cot again, assuming the same rigid, pain-laced posture as before. The silence in the tent is profound, broken only by the generator's hum and the endless weeping rain. Dan fumbles in his medical crate, his hands suddenly clumsy. What is the treatment for this? There is no mention of pattern scarring from systematic abuse in his field manual. He can't put a splint on a memory. He can't apply a bandage to a history. He pulls out a tube of analgesic balm. It's meant for muscle aches, for sprains. It's a pathetic, useless gesture, and he knows it. He uncaps the tube and squeezes a small amount onto his fingers. The medicinal smell of wintergreen and camphor fills the air. This might help, he says, the words tasting like lies in his mouth. It can numb the area. He offers it to her, but she doesn't take it. She just stares at his hand. He realizes his mistake. A man is offering to touch the source of her pain. He sets the tube down on the creep beside her, a safe distance away. You were captured, he states, trying to piece it together. On the Eastern Front. And then, what happened? How did you get here? She finally looks at him. The emptiness in her eyes is now filled with a deep, dark water. I was a radio operator. Near Königsberg. They came in the winter. She pauses, swallowing. The cellar. Then the camp. For many months. Königsberg. East Prussia. The name itself is a death knell. A place where the Soviet winter offensive had ground the German army into dust and desperation. So, how did you get away? Dan presses.
A reporter now instead of a medic. He needs to understand the shape of this horror. A trade, she says, her voice a monotone. They exchanged some of us for their prisoners. Last year, they sent me to a hospital in Berlin. Then they gave me a new uniform. Sent me west, to a supply depot near Remagen. Her story is a journey through the circles of hell. Captured by one enemy. Brutalized. Traded like a commodity. Then reuniformed by her own side and thrown back into the collapsing machine. Only to be captured by a second enemy. Her entire existence for the past year has been inside a cage with different keepers. Dan looks at her. A Luftwaffe Helferin, sitting in a US Army medical tent, carrying the indelible marks of a Soviet interrogation cell on her body. She is not just a prisoner of war. She is a living artifact of the whole damn continent's nightmare. And the simple, apologetic phrase she had used before returns to him, now imbued with a terrible weight. Every time I sit, it hurts. It wasn't a complaint. It was a confession. It was the title of a story he was just beginning to read, written in a language of scars.
The thin wall of Corporal Avery's professional detachment crumbles into dust. He stands in the middle of the tent, the smell of antiseptic balm mingling with the damp earth, and feels utterly, profoundly useless. He is a mechanic of the human body. He sets bones, stitches skin, disperses sulfa powder to ward off infection. His work is tangible, his results measurable. A wound is either open or closed. A fever is either rising or falling. But there is no procedure for mending a soul that has been systematically broken. He looks at Liesel, at the controlled stillness of her posture, the way she holds her pain so tightly within herself. Her quiet endurance is more accusatory than any scream. It is a testament to an evil so mundane, so patient, that it defies the chaotic violence he has come to understand as war. A shell lands, a man dies. It's brutal, it's fast. This was slow. This was intimate. Someone had to design the tool. Someone had to lead her to it. Someone had to listen to her pain day after day and choose to continue. A memory surfaces, sharp and unwanted. A bridge out St. Lo, a German machine gun nest, an MG-42, had caught his platoon in the open. He remembers the sound, like canvas ripping, a sound you never forget. He remembers crawling on his belly through a ditch, mud and blood in his mouth, dragging a kid named Peterson, whose leg was a ruin of cloth and flesh. He remembers the boys screaming, then his whimpering, then silence. Dan had done his job. He had put pressure on the wound, injected morphine, tagged him for the surgeons. He had compartmentalized. It was what you did to survive. You built walls inside your head. But the walls aren't working now. Liesel's story isn't about the impersonal fury of a machine gun. It's about the deliberate, focused cruelty of another human being. It bypasses all his defenses. The kid, Peterson, had been a victim of tactics, of a battle for a piece of ground. This woman was a victim of something far older and darker. Dan turns away from her, running a hand over his face. His fingers tremble slightly. He feels a sudden, suffocating claustrophobia in the small tent. The rain seems to beat down harder. The generator sounds like a laboring heart. He sees not just this one woman, but a whole continent of people carrying wounds like hers, secret atlases of pain hidden beneath their clothes. How many of them are out there, shuffling in the processing lines, their faces blank masks hiding histories that no one would ever ask about? The war, he realizes, is not just the fighting. The fighting is only the beginning of the story. The real war is what comes after, the long, silent echo of the violence. There's not much I can do, he says, the admission costing him. It feels like a failure on a fundamental level. For the scars, they are too old. Liesel nods, as if she expected nothing more. I know. Her acceptance is worse than an accusation. It confirms his helplessness. He is an agent of a vast, powerful army, an army that has crossed an ocean and shattered the Third Reich, and all he can offer this one woman is a useless tube of ointment and a few empty words. He looks around the tent, desperate for something, anything that can provide a measure of comfort. His eyes land on a small pile of spare wool blankets in the corner,
kept for shock victims. They are coarse and scratchy, but they are thick. Without a word, he walks over, grabs 2 of them, and folds them into a thick, soft square. He walks back to her and holds out the folded bundle. "Here," he says. "This might make it softer to sit on." She looks at the blankets, then up at his face. For the first time since she entered the tent, her expression changes. The mask of weary resignation cracks, and for a fleeting second he sees a glint of surprise, of something that might almost be gratitude. Her eyes well up, but no tears fall. It's as if even her sorrow is too exhausted to manifest itself. She reaches out with a hesitant hand and takes the folded blankets. She holds them in her lap, her fingers tracing the rough texture of the wool. It's a pathetic offering against the scale of her suffering, a single grain of sand on a beach of pain. But it is something. It is a recognition. He has done all he can. He needs to move her on, get back to the endless line of men waiting outside. But he can't bring himself to say the words. He just stands there, watching her clutch the folded blankets. A man who went into a tent to treat a simple complaint and came out carrying the weight of a war he never knew existed.
The moment stretches, suspended between the medic's helplessness and the prisoner's silent grief. Corporal Avery knows the protocol. He should call for the MP, have her escorted to the women's enclosure, and move on to the next case. There are a dozen more men with trench foot, a corporal with a hacking cough that sounds like pneumonia, a lieutenant with a piece of shrapnel in his arm that needs cleaning. The machinery of processing prisoners cannot stop for one woman's invisible history. But he remains frozen. The folded blankets in her lap are a small, inadequate dam against an ocean of trauma. Handing them to her felt less like a medical act and more like a prayer. It was the only language he had left. Liesel finally breaks the silence. She looks down at the wool bundle, then back up at him. "Danke," she says. The word is a mere breath, but it lands with the force of a physical blow. It is a word of grace from a place he couldn't imagine possessing any. He just nods, unable to form a reply. He feels a profound and unsettling shift within himself. The world he understood an hour ago, a world of clear lines, of us and them, of the wounded and the whole, has been irrevocably blurred. He used to look at the columns of German prisoners and see a defeated army. Now he sees a collection of individual scars, a library of untold agonies. He wonders how many of the men he has briskly processed and dismissed were carrying stories as horrifying as Liesel's. He has been looking at their bodies, but he has not been seeing their wounds. He finally finds his voice. "You can keep them," he says, gesturing to the blankets. "When they move you, take them with you." He walks to the tent flap and pulls it aside. The gray, wet world rushes back in. The rain is lighter now, a persistent drizzle. PFC Miller is standing nearby, sheltering under the eaves of a supply truck, smoking a cigarette. He sees Dan and starts to walk over. "All set, Corporal?" Miller asks. Dan turns to look back at Liesel one last time. She is still sitting on the cot, her back ramrod straight, clutching the folded US Army blankets like a holy relic. She does not look at him again. She has retreated back into her fortress. "Yeah," Dan says, his voice rough. He watches as Miller leads her out of the tent. She walks stiffly, taking the blankets with her, a small gray figure disappearing into the larger gray landscape of the camp. He watches until she is just another prisoner, swallowed by the crowd. He turns back to his medical station. The tube of analgesic balm is still sitting on the crate where he left it. He picks it up and stares at it. A useless remedy for an incurable wound. He feels a sudden, violent urge to hurl it into the mud, to smash something, to scream. But he doesn't. He just puts the cap back on and places it carefully back in his aid bag. The rage cools into something heavier, a cold, dense sorrow that settles deep in his bones. The rest of the day is a blur of routine. He cleans wounds, distributes pills, applies bandages. He works with mechanical efficiency, his hands moving through familiar motions while his mind is miles away, in a cellar in Königsberg. With each prisoner he treats, he finds himself looking past their physical injuries, searching their eyes for a sign of the other war, the one that leaves no visible trace. He sees the fatigue, the fear, the resignation. But now he sees it all through a new lens. He wonders what simple phrase each of them might utter that would unlock a history of private horror. "I can't sleep in the dark. Loud noises make me shake. Every time I sit, it hurts." That evening, long after the last prisoner has been processed for the day, Dan sits alone in the mess tent, a tin cup of lukewarm coffee growing cold in his hands. The other medics are playing cards, their laughter echoing hollowly in the large canvas room. He can't join them. He can't summon the energy for casual banter. He keeps seeing the grid of scars, a perfect man-made constellation of pain.
He shifts his weight on the hard wooden bench. For a fleeting, sickening moment, he imagines he can feel a steel grid beneath him. He stands up abruptly, knocking his coffee over. The dark liquid spreads across the table like a stain. He walks out of the tent into the cold, damp night. He stands in the mud, breathing in the air thick with the smell of rain and sorrow, and understands a terrible truth. The war would end. The guns would fall silent, and the treaties would be signed. But for him, for Liesel, for millions of others, it would never truly be over. It would follow them home. It would live in the silence between words. It would ache in their bones on cold, rainy nights. It was a scar that would never fade.